Pac-Man is not a character that needs an introduction. Since the character's original arcade title, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't heard of this big yellow thing in this day and age. While you don't hear about the character that much these days when it comes to big video games, the most recent I can think of off the top of my head is Pac-Man 99 on the Switch, it would be a lie to say Pac-Man isn't well known even today. The character and series has seen all kinds of video games across various genres, from kart racers to pinball to puzzle to search engine and of course platformer. Pac-Man is no stranger to the platformer genre, with his earliest entry going as far back as 1984 with the arcade game Pac-Land, a well-received arcade game and my most hated Smash stage. While the character was well known for his 2D platformers in the 80s and the early 90s, naturally he would make the jump to 3D during the 5th generation of consoles. Enter Pac-Man World, released in 1999 for the PS1, developed and published by Namco, a game with an interesting development history. The game got its start in the form of Pac-Man Ghost Zone, a 1997 PS1 prototype that was shown at E3 that same year. The story goes that Namco Home Tech was tasked with creating a new game and came up with 8 new ideas, half original, half based off of existing Namco properties. When presenting to the head of the studio, he dismissed the original ideas and asked him to focus on Namco properties specifically, eventually being told to develop Pac-Man Ghost Zone further. The game had tank controls and revolved around this bizarre rule where Namco said that the office wasn't allowed to use the Pac-Man character. The home office in Japan was nervous about a 3D Pac-Man title and put in this rule, telling Home Tech they weren't allowed to use him. To work around this, the developers centered the plot around a kid who gets sucked into the game and turns into Pac-Man. So essentially, you're not playing as Pac-Man, you're playing a kid who is Pac-Man. Yeah, I don't get it either. The title was eventually presented to the Namco main office, who were not happy with the quality of the project. In fact, they were so unhappy with it, they fired the majority of the development team and had the game redone from scratch. The game would finally see the light of day in September of 1999, releasing to favorable reviews and spawning 2 sequels to the GameCube and the PS2. This game was one of the earliest games I remember playing. The PS1 and the PS2 were my go-to consoles way back in the day, and I would find myself popping in this game more times than I can count. The thing is, I never actually finished this game until recently, and after finishing it after so long, I can safely say this game was rougher around the edges than I remember. Also, I am emulating for this video. I'd happily play the game on original hardware, but I don't have a capture card at the moment, on top of the fact that my memory card went missing years ago, and the fact that my disc doesn't work in the console anymore. Okay, so I'm going off script here for a moment. I had this bit planned where I would just, pop in tech and call it a game nobody cares about, so that one's working fine, but watch what happened when I put the game into the PlayStation 2. Wait, what? Hold on. Okay, I guess it's just the PS1 then. Alright, enough babbling. Let's put this game into my PlayStation and make use of this footage. The opening is actually pretty nice. The cutscenes on this game actually aged pretty well over the years. The world is simple and cartoony, the environments are nice, and the models look great. I can't say the same for that cat though, who looked at that and said yes. We get a brief synopsis of the plot through what we see here. It's Pac-Man's 20th anniversary and his various friends and family are getting ready to celebrate, but each one has something happen to them. Pac Jr. is stolen by robots, Baby Pac is abducted and Puka gets a concussion. Chomp Chomp the dog is taken by mummies, Professor Pac gets lost in front of his destination and is abducted by aliens for being an idiot, and I'm pretty sure they killed Miss Pac-Man. Pac-Man comes home, sees the devastation, and title. The game loads and we have the loudest main menu theme I've ever heard in my life. Oh jeez. Yep, that's the window. Thanks, Pac-Man! As great as the music sounds, I always got caught off guard by how loud it was. It's not bad or anything, it's just loud. It's like you go in expecting a nice fun game and it blasts you with every big band concert on Earth. We start the game and Pac-Man's day gets worse as he's surrounded by paper which turns out to be flyers for a party on Ghost Island, stating that Pac-Man will be there live and in person. He then makes the trip to the island and is spotted by this ghost with binoculars. If you know anything about Pac-Man, then you know precisely why he starts running like he left the stove on. The ghost shouts for his boss, who is acting like an entitled brat.
I wanted gold streamers and red balloons, but DJ stinks, the banners are crooked, and the cake should be chocolate. You're gonna ruin my party!
This big dude is Talkman, a robot pretending to be Pac-Man, intending to capture the real Pac-Man and take his place. However, the ghosts managed to screw this up and they got Miss Pac-Man instead. She's not dead, but now she's out for blood.
If I had a power pellet,
After this, we're thrust into the tutorial so we can get a general feel for what we'll experience throughout the game. Right away, the player is given a small area to play in. This lets you get a feel for how Pac-Man moves and jumps. You're also introduced to the game's various mechanics, like hanging onto cliffs, swimming, as well as a technique called the rev roll. If you hold square, you can start to run in place. Letting go launches Pac-Man into a roll, which can be used to attack enemies, roll up steep hills, and use these special running platforms to open gates, traverse large gaps, and travel to higher areas you can't normally reach. I learned ages ago that it's possible to cheese the game with the rev roll as you keep momentum when revving, so you can close gaps if you jump while doing so on one of the moving platforms. You also get this mud bounce, which can be used to attack, bounce up to slightly higher areas, open chests for items, and activate various switches scattered throughout the game. Pressing circle lets you throw down a pack dot for a short range attack. Holding down circle gives you a more powerful throwdown at the cost of 10 pack dots. It's a very situational attack, and I only really found myself using it near the end of the game. The rest of the time I burned 10 dots and decided to spin around like an idiot. As far as items go, you got the typical power pellets, pack dots, and fruit. You also have a couple of special items, like this chrome suit, which makes Pac-Man invincible and allows you to go underwater to get items and chests Pac-Man can't normally get to. For a tutorial level, it's pretty good. It tells you everything you need to know for the game and still maintains itself as an actual level. You grab this token to finish the level and we're introduced to the final score screen. Remember that thing I said about making sure your games work properly? At the end of every level you have this machine which pulls together all the fruit and dots that you got for a chance to win extra points and additional lives. The fruit symbols follow typical Pac-Man rules. The earlier the fruit would typically be in the arcade game, the less points it gives you, with the Galaxy giving you the most points and lives. Later levels also have these letters scattered around that spell out Pac-Man. Collecting all of them takes you to a bonus level for even more fruit. The format for each bonus level only changes between each level theme, so if you have an idea of one bonus level, you can just go to another one, get all the letters, and do the bonus level all over again for easy extra lives. With enough fruit, you can effectively time yourself and farm Galaxians for all the lives you want, which will make death trivial. I'll explain why soon enough. Let's get past the next loading screen and blow out my eardrums. This is Ghost Island, the hub world of the game. Each area is divided into several themes with the same general format, a few levels capped off with a boss. You got Pirates, Ancient Ruins, Space, Funhouse, Factory, and Mansion. While each level is linear in structure, there is sort of a set way to get through the game, sort of not. In typical game progression form, you have a set of levels with the later ones locked off until you beat the previous one, all ending with a boss fight. At the same time, you can easily put down one level in one area and move on to another area if you're having trouble. The only catch is the second half of the game is blocked off until you complete the first half of the game. Once you beat all the bosses in the Pirates, Ruins, and Space areas, only then can you access the other three. For this video, I'm going to give my general thoughts on how the game was in each area. Let's start with Pac-Man himself. How does he control? Well, he seems to control a lot better than he did in the Ghost Zone footage, so already we're off to a good start. Though, to be fair, I was using an Xbox controller when I recorded this footage, and I am using an emulator, so performance might not be, as it truly was back on the original thing. Any future PS1 titles I do on this channel will have me use this little dongle that lets me plug in a PS1 or PS2 controller into my PC. It's completely unnecessary, but it's a little thing that makes me happy. Let's talk about Pirates. The first theme we're introduced to is Pirates. You got your typical pirate junk here. Barrels, cannons, water, and excessive property damage. This area is as basic as the game gets with its platforming and difficulty. Run through some areas, jump on some skeletons, swim in the water. Music is pretty okay. I can actually hear myself think now, so that's already a plus. As far as difficulty goes overall, it's not backbreaking or anything of the sort, it's your standard World 1 difficulty. Near the end of level 3 we find Puka in a cage. You may have noticed this key I nabbed earlier in the level. This is used to save your friends and is needed to beat the game. I don't know what happens if you don't save them, maybe it doesn't let you do the boss or the final boss, but again, I don't know. I finished this game with 92% completion and got all the friends, so don't quote me on that. Speaking of the boss, here's boss number 1, HMS Windbag. It is a sentient pirate ship with a face. This boss has two simple phases, outrun the cannonballs and then deflect the cannonballs. I wouldn't call this boss difficult by any stretch of the imagination, but it did get a little trickier with the changing attack patterns, which was nice to see. Plus it gave me a little extra fruit for the slots, which was even better. That's all there is to say really. For an early game world, it's okay. Not too challenging, but good for a start. That's better than what I can say about the next area though. After Windbag is turned into Driftwood, we can go to the next location, the Ancient Ruins. This area's gimmick is lighting. You have these dark areas that are lit up when Pac-Man walks near them. There's also a hefty amount of platforming in this section, so it's good to pay attention and be careful with all the traps that it has. I wouldn't call the levels in this difficult, just long. The uptick in difficulty, however, is evident, and you can see it in the form of cavemen, spiders, floor traps, and floors that break away if you stand on them. This is where my criticisms with the game begin though, and I can describe a chunk of them with a single word. Backtracking. You want those Pac-Man letters, Pac dots, and fruit? You're gonna need to backtrack. Now, I typically don't have a major issue with backtracking. I think it can be good in a game if you go through a whole ass level and it leaves you going, "Aw, poo, what did I miss?" But the thing is, it becomes clear early on that there's a lot of backtracking in Pac-Man World. Especially since some of these parts where you need to backtrack center around very difficult platforming segments, which I can get for the sake of difficulty, but sometimes you can get around them with enough lives. Why waste your time jumping around all these carts all over again when you can just kill yourself and respawn? I should also note that this set of stages generally felt longer than the other ones. It wasn't horrible, but it's how I noticed the backtracking being present. You could probably chalk it up to there being only 2 stages instead of 3 like the other worlds. My guess is the devs were strapped for time when creating the game and had to start from literal scratch, so the ruins didn't get as much love as the rest of the worlds. Another topic I'd like to talk about is death. Not only will you die in Pac-Man World, you will die again and again, be it by complete accident as you can see here, or from a healthy dose of vitamin bullcrap. And if you weren't worried you're gonna see any of that today, don't worry, you'll get your vitamin B. After we jump through some more lava, nearly lose our skin, and rescue the family dog, we can go down to the kitchen and grab the whiskey because we got boss number 2. Our boss this time is ePSXe. He is also known as my most hated boss of all time. This boss has 2 phases. The first phase is like a reverse crash chase segment. You have the point of view of a mummy while you control Pac-Man and run away from the camera instead of running towards it. You've also got these spears coming out of the floor that you need to dodge to proceed. Not too painful within itself. If anything, this is the easiest part of the boss, let alone the game. Making it to the exit loads phase 2, where you go against a giant sphinx. This is where the meat of the boss is. You have these 4 platforms here that you have to run on them until they click. This opens the sphinx's arms and exposes a gemstone heart. Roll into it to do damage, do it enough times, and you win. On paper this doesn't sound too difficult, but you have to keep in mind, Pac-Man World had to be rebuilt from the ground up halfway through development. Here's a couple things about the boss that got on my nerves. Jumping to each of these pillars isn't bad, but for some reason the trigger for moving on them is very precise. You practically have to stand dead center in them, otherwise nothing happens. If you're not careful or observant, you can launch yourself into the lava by mistake or run in place wondering why you haven't heard the click yet. Also, remember the sprint jump I mentioned you can use to clear gaps? This is the one stage where it doesn't work. I know this because muscle memory has led me to many a death. As a means of increasing difficulty, each time you roll against the gemstone heart, more obstacles are going to get in your way. There's a tornado, more meteors, and an actual laser beam that sweeps the stage and is borderline impossible to avoid. On the last leg of the boss, every single attack I just mentioned is happening all at once. I mentioned this in the last video that a boss fight isn't supposed to be easy. A boss fight is supposed to be a test of skill, and if there's multiple boss fights over the course of a game, naturally they're, supposed to get harder. This is boss number 2. I can sympathize with not having enough time to test the game due to, starting from scratch, and I'm not going to pretend to be a game designer or anything like that, but wouldn't an early game boss be one of the things to be tested first? It's very telling how hard this boss is when I went into it with 25 lives and came out with 6. You know why I brought up the life grinding earlier? You practically need it to finish this boss, it's ridiculous. Then again, I am bad at video games, so there's that too. Once all the alcohol we drank during that boss leaves our system, we can go to the next logical location after going from a pirate town to some ancient ruins. Space! This set of levels is best described by its main gimmicks, light bridges, lasers, and platforming. This is where we're introduced to some of the more trickier platforming segments. As a kid I remember these being difficult and never got to the boss until years later. You have a lot of lasers in these levels and more sections involving switches. There's a good amount of areas where you have to time jumps and movements so you don't get zapped. We're also introduced to some new segments with the flying rev-roll platforms where you have to hover in place by constantly pressing square so you don't get hurt. You also get these platforms that shrink periodically along with these plasma orbs that you have to grab onto, which have a very small footprint for you to actually stand on. The lines in the orb change depending on where you're standing on or grabbing it from. That's honestly pretty cool. The second level of this world felt like the ruins, just a long trog that felt like a chore to get through. I felt like I spent forever on the level and I only realized I was halfway through it when I found the letter C. Oh, Professor Pac is here too, I guess. Also, there's some minor nonsense with one of the letters. You have this section here with a large pillar and a chest. Now, 99% of people on the first run are going to bash this chest without thinking about it for whatever's inside. But look what's on top of the pillar. You can't jump or butt bounce your way up there. You need that chest as a stepping stool. Not much to say about the third level, more of the same really, not too difficult, but not terrible either. Our boss this time is called King Galaxian and is in the form of a shoot 'em up, which is pretty neat. You hop on this little space glider that shoots whenever you press a button. You have to shoot random aliens until you come across this large metal body. Once you shoot the head, you get to the meat of the boss. Shoot Galaxian's eyes until they explode. He'll gradually start throwing more energy bolts at you and more aliens will start coming out of every crevice possible. Blow up all 4 eyes and you win. I'll start this off by saying that this is actually one of my favorite boss fights. I'm also incredibly biased as I grew up playing a lot of Galaga and Space Invaders, but that's beside the point. I like that this boss tries to do something different rather than make it platforming based. It keeps it interesting and makes for a mid-game boss that doesn't feel too much like what we've already seen. It's a nice breath of fresh air, it's fun to move and shoot, and it doesn't feel stiff at all. The music here is really nice too. You have a remix of the Galaga theme as the background music once you get to Galaxian. I love it. I saw people online say that this boss is also extremely difficult, along the lines of Anubis Rex even. I disagree. This boss is a challenge, that much is true, but Anubis Rex is an unbalanced mess. This feels fine. I remember playing this boss back then and I didn't have that many issues with it. Yeah, it took a while, but it wasn't ridiculously difficult. It was finishable within a reasonable amount of time, and hell, even if it was hard, I wouldn't be as harsh. These days, the boss is trivial. You may have noticed that I'm shooting alarmingly quick. That's because our good friend Cheese is back. When shooting, most players are going to continuously tap the same button over and over and over again. Each button tap has its own small cooldown between each shot, preventing you from spamming. However, the game is programmed to have this cooldown for each specific button, so while waiting for X to finish the cooldown, you can easily press square and alternate between the two. Or, you can do what I did, and scrub the hell out of the controller and get an unstoppable death laser. Why spend $50 on a controller with a turbo button when you can be the turbo button? Galaxian has been turned into goo and now we get to start the second half of the game, starting with the funhouse. This set of levels cranked up difficulty a little bit through some trickier platforming and an excessive amount of fire. The platforming is fine, difficulty increases as expected, more switches, more moving platforms, you run through here, jump past this, get through that, and... A pet peeve I have with this game is the audio. Some things are a lot louder than they need to be, like the previously mentioned cannon and the main menu theme. The hammers might be the loudest thing in the whole game. I was wearing headphones playing this from what I recall, and it actually scared me when I got here. The platforming section they're in isn't that much better either. You have these conveyor platforms, so not only do you have to deal with timing your jumps, you have to make sure you don't get crushed. Speaking of platforms, there's also these spinning tubes where you have to time jumps and position yourself correctly to move ahead. You then have to jump to the top of the same tube and back over to proceed. It's not the worst platforming segment in the game, but don't do what I did and try to look for jank here because you'll fall through the floor and die. I don't have much left to say here, so let me talk about this clown that flies around in a plane. It laughs at you when you take damage, as demonstrated here. I also learned that the laughter is contact-based, not damage-based. I know this because I died from an unrelated enemy and one paraded my corpse around. Coming back to the tubes, the last level has some shit that can mess you up if you're not paying attention or you haven't been through the level before. Games have this thing called draw distance, which renders various things depending on how close you are. In this level, if you just go straight for the Revro ramp as shown here, you won't realize there's a spinning platform pipe in the distance, so while you might intend to go to the exit, you'll end up throwing Pac-Man into the void like yesterday's trash.
Yeah, he's under the bed. Poor bastard.
The boss this time is called Clown Pre, and it doesn't involve fighting. Instead, it's a race against a bunch of clowns. It's a race. You just finish first. That's it, really. You drive around with X and you control yourself with the D-pad. If you pick up a power pellet and press circle, you get a speed boost. This is told to us by a very stupid clown who doesn't realize he shouldn't have told you this. I've seen comments online about this one too, and I agree, it is pretty difficult. Playing it now, it's not the worst boss, but I can see why people don't like it, especially from a kid's perspective. The bumper car controls terribly. It is the slipperiest vehicle I have ever used in a game. Despite this, I was able to get a handle on the controls quickly and finish with no problem at all. I imagine a lot of people fell off the ledges, but that wasn't happening for me. In fact, I think I only died once. Everyone else though, they dropped like flies. I'm pretty sure I knocked over half of them myself. Once we're done committing vehicular manslaughter, we can go to the factory, because nothing says fun kids game like scalding hot steam, killer robots, and every OSHA violation ever crammed into a single level. We get something resembling moving platforms in the form of this robot. If you stand under it, it will slam down on top of your head, but you can walk on top of it and bounce on it until the cows come home. These levels focus more on the rev roll and have some trickier platforming along with easily avoidable deaths if you're not someone who goes by Mr. Max on the internet. This was where I found myself using the pack throw more often. These laser gun wielding robot things are a little annoying to kill since you can damage yourself a lot just by butt bouncing on them. These levels feel a lot more rougher than the ones I've played already up to this point. I noticed that on some ledges the grabbing function just seemed to work when it felt like it. Then again, if my first draft of this script, if this is anything to go by, I was recording that particular section of footage at like 1 in the morning, so I probably could have just been tired. We also got a lot more water segments here as well, including robot sharks, which actually aren't that much of an issue if you hug the back walls. What I do have a problem with is what amounts to the longest water segment in the whole game. The last level in this world has you swimming around in directions looking for fruit and switches to hit so you can proceed. Looking back on the footage, it wasn't that bad, but because of how slowly you move, it makes it drag on, and you just want it to end already. Anyway, we save Pac Jr., get the most dated dialogue I've ever seen in my life, and get to the boss, Chrome Keeper. I didn't hate this boss, but I didn't like it either. It's not annoyingly difficult like Anubis Rex, thank God, but it's a small challenge due to its length. Interestingly enough, this is the first boss with a health bar. I could summarize the boss like this. There are magnets, there are switches that are heated, and Dollar General Iron Giant kicks boxes at you. Once in a while he'll kick a wooden box at you that will give you a chrome suit. What you're supposed to do is get the suit, hit every single switch, and then hit the center switch to do damage to him. Your main obstacle are these metal boxes which he will kick at you, as well as this magnet. Keep in mind, Pac-Man becomes a solid hunk of metal with the suit, so if you just happen to be under this with the suit, put your controller down and go grab a Pepsi or something because you're in for a ride until it wears off. And yes, you will get caught at the worst times. A lot. Again, I don't hate this boss. I don't like it, but I don't hate it. It's fine. It's a late game boss. I mean, yeah. Finally, we're near the end of the game, the mansion area. I started the first level and I think this was where Pac-Man realized he was in a crappy YouTube video and tried to escape. For being an endgame world, there's actually not that much to talk about. I was surprised. We have a few familiar enemies here. Skeletons are back and they're immune to the pack throws. Bats are also here, and they kind of reskin the parrots on the pirate levels in that they drop bombs. Ghosts are also everywhere in this level, fitting in with the theme. In terms of platforming, we get coffins that move in different directions, and some that start to shrink as soon as you jump on them. The difficulty uptick is nice, and makes for a pretty decent late game challenge. Level 2 is more of the same. The last level has the most obstacles by far. Fire, bats, lightning, fire, shrinking coffins, fire, 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 more fire, just an excessive amount of hey, I unlocked marathon mode! A small step away from the game's main content so I can talk about some glitches. As is typical with old games, Pac-Man World has a couple of glitches. They aren't anything major and game-breaking like Bugdom's wall clip, but they're not something I experienced playing this as a kid. Now, I would take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I am emulating this game. I do not know if I would be able to recreate this on original hardware. The first one I found was in the third pirate level, though it was less of a glitch and more of a weird hitbox found by me experimenting, if anything. I jumped into this crack here to see what would happen, and I turned into a pinball. The next one was in space, where in trying to get the first Pac-Man letter in one of the stages, I managed to phase into the platform it was sitting on. Jumping ahead a little bit to the mansion area, there's a section with these stone platforms which move a little bit while you stand on them. Natural instinct would tell you that these would either fall or shrink away if you stand on them too long, but that didn't happen no matter how long I stood on them. I tempted fate and stood on them for a good minute or so and nothing happened. I figured they were safe, but I managed to clip through an identical platform and die almost immediately after. And now the last one, in the funhouse. Remember the hammers? Well, I can't even begin to describe what happened, just watch. You tell me what happened, because I sure as hell can't. Okay, enough screwing around, let's just finish the game already.
I don't want to be replaced by some goddamn piece of junk, good for nothing bucket of bolts hunk.
After enough suffering, we're finally able to get to Pac-Man himself. Entering the last level gives us one more cutscene of Pac-Man being an attention whore.
Look, here I am. Love me.
With everyone acting appropriately. Allow me to spoil the fight by saying that when it came to difficulty, Pac-Man was around here. You're placed into this arena with a few ghosts, some switches, and the big man himself. In contrast to other bosses, Pac-Man has 3 phases, each one based around Pac-Man's own moves. This boss is a one-shot deal with no checkpoints. If you die, you have to start from the beginning. As you fight the boss and inevitably take damage, each friend you rescued along the way will give you health so you can keep fighting. It's a nice way to keep the fight going if you don't have a lot of lives to spare, especially since this boss is pretty lengthy as it is. Phase 1 is the dot throw. Pac-Man walks around the arena throwing meteors all over the place, as you do, with each one spawning a small amount of Pac dots. All you have to do here is pick up the dots, get close to Pac-Man, and throw them back at him until the dots stop spawning. The second phase focuses on the butt bounce. The switches will pop out of the ground, hit them down to pull Pac-Man to the center of the arena and bounce on his head for damage. He will also do his own butt bounce, which has an area of effect that covers most of the stage. If you're not paying attention to when he makes contact with the ground, you can easily get hurt. The third phase revolves around the rev roll. It's also the easiest part of the whole boss because it's the only part you can choose to win. Here's how the phase is supposed to work on paper. Pac-Man will get ready to roll, he will then do his roll, you avoid him, and then you use your own roll to attack him to do damage while he recuperates. I learned from experimenting that as long as Pac-Man isn't attacking or doesn't just take damage, the game doesn't care if he's stunned or not. As long as you roll into him when he's not actually doing the attack, you can deal damage. The third phase without this knowledge is a bit tricky, but once you learn this, the last part of the boss ironically becomes the easiest. Once we're done, Pac-Man breaks down and he's revealed to have been a ghost in a mech suit the whole time.
It's so unfair! You ruined everything! Nobody loves a ghost!
Pac-Man shows sympathy for this little guy by eating him alive in front of a crowd of people. We're given a small screen that shows our progress, and that's the game. That was Pac-Man World. Now I know what you're not thinking. What's left after the main story? Well, you got Classic Mode, which is just straight up Pac-Man, like no-nonsense original arcade Pac-Man running on your PlayStation, as well as Mazes Mode. Remember the Marathon mode I unlocked earlier? This is where you can do it. It's a non-stop keep going until you lose Pac-Man, well, Marathon. I actually tried to do this, but sadly I ran out of lives with 2 stages to go, and, well, that took forever and that's more Pac-Man than I need for a lifetime, so I'm not doing that again. I googled the reward you get for this, and you get a bunch of concept art from the game's development that you can flip through. These days, this kind of thing isn't that amazing, especially with devs having their own, social media where they can post concepts freely, but for 1999 when the internet wasn't nearly as widespread as it is today, this is pretty cool. Put yourself in the shoes of some kid who just turned on their PS1 in 2000-something. They stomach a whole weekend of Pac-Man and get rewarded with pictures from when the game was being made. You'd think that's pretty sweet. I guess now that I've actually played this whole thing, I could say that the game is absolutely rougher than I remember, but I learned quite a bit about it while working on this video, and with what I know now, I can't say I'm surprised it didn't get as much polish as it could have. Even then, you still have a healthy amount of content out of the box, and the game still holds up visually. The worlds are nicely designed, and the game is still fun after so long. You still have a solid game here at the end of the day. This playthrough was the first time I have actually finished this game in nearly, 20 years, and I'm kinda glad I did. Maybe the nostalgia filter muddies things up a bit, but I still enjoyed playing this game, despite the bugs and issues that it does have. A solid 7 out of 10, if anything. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and your thoughts down in the comments below. Feedback is always appreciated, as I want to make these videos as best as I can. If this is your first time here, be sure to subscribe for more and check out my previous video as well. I will see you all next time.
And a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3, 4.